James McCullen is no more. Now, you are Destro.
The moment I say the name Destro, I know you guys instantly envision his iconic silver mask and blingy gold chain with a ruby on top. And yes, he is one luxurious guy, but there's so much more to him. If you peel back that Beryllium mask, you'll find a legacy that's stained with blood, betrayal, and a weird code of honor. That's the legacy of his dynasty, because Destro isn't just one man. Destro is an entire lineage. I mean, the one we all know is literally Destro the 24th. Like, that's crazy. And it's that same story that keeps repeating itself. For decades and decades, this one family has been single-handedly dominating the weapons market and profiting from war like no one's business. And of course, donning that iconic silver mask has quite a tragic origin, if you ask me. It's quite a heavy burden to carry, right? But they carry it with their heads held high. And today we're diving into the depths of this lineage. We all know Destro, but what about his father and his sons? Today we're unraveling all those mysteries, covering as many versions of this lineage, some that you might not have even read. John McCullen. Alright guys, we start from the very beginning with one of the earliest ancestors of this lineage, but there is a major twist. Depending on which arc or continuity you follow, the details about this originating member change drastically. Hell, his name even changes. But don't worry, we'll be covering pretty much every important version of this early ancestor. First, let's start with the titular John McCullen, who was mentioned in the G.I. Joe Cobra Reborn series. Here, Destro explains that the McCullens go all the way back to the 13th century and had already built a reputation as elite weapons makers and dealers. However, one fine day, the English had broken their truce and had gone back on an agreement that had been struck between the McCullens and the king, Henry Plantagenet. In that version, the English king breaks the agreement, pushes for harsher taxes, and the fallout turns into a massacre that devastates the McCullen clan. Destro's ancestor John McCullen was imprisoned for almost 7 years in a tower, just waiting for his execution. But of course, the king and his men had high-key fucked up here, and the McCullens weren't at fault at all. So what did they do? They hid John's identity using an iron mask, and that very mask became a symbol of all the struggles and suffering that their clan had to survive over the years, just to reclaim their freedom. Destro mentions how that mask gave him the unique perspective of his ancestors, how it allowed him to see the world how they saw it, almost as if that mask was a physical symbol for their intergenerational trauma and hatred for the English. And that sounds like a pretty compelling origin story, not gonna lie. I love how it shows the way the trauma has been passed on from Destro to Destro and has almost turned into a sense of pride. And this same vein is witnessed in the OG Marvel comics. Here, the origin story changes though. We've got the very first Destro, named James McCullen, who was selling weapons during the English Civil War. But much like the sneaky bastards these guys are, he was pulling a blinder and selling weapons to both sides. Too bad he got caught eventually by Oliver Cromwell's men. At that point, punishment was inevitable, but we had no idea it would be that gruesome. You see, they couldn't exactly kill him because they still needed to buy weapons from him. So, what did they do? Trap his face in an iron mask. Ouch! But just like the previous iteration, here too the future Destros turned the mask into a symbol of strength and pride. The G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra movie also does its own version, where James McCullen IX is tied to that same legacy of betrayal, punishment, and the birth of the metal mask. Once again, an iron mask was welded onto his face. It's only in the 1980s G.I. Joe animated series where they switch up the backstory. Here the ancestor is accused of witchcraft and is forced to wear that metal mask as a mark of punishment. So whatever the backstory or name or even time period, one thing remains constant for this first Destro. He's one badass guy who doesn't bother to play by the rules. Something that's almost genetic and passed on to every Destro ever. They've clearly got huge balls, and even though John or James pays for it, they own that shit. James McCullen, Destro 23. Now we quickly move forward in time to the man who quite literally shaped the Destro we all know, love, and feel. Yep, he's the dad, and boy is their relationship a mess. Destro's got some next level daddy issues, and I can't even blame him, man. One of the first mentions of Destro's father in the OG continuity of a real American hero is in issue 96. The Baroness is on the verge of falling and will sacrifice herself just to kill Snake Eyes, who she believes killed her brother Eugene de Cobra. But Destro reveals that it wasn't Snake Eyes, and he actually saw the whole thing take place. This is when he goes into a flashback of what happened 20 years ago in Saigon, Vietnam. He accompanied his father, the previous Destro, on a business trip. We already get a glimpse into what kind of a father he was as he tells his son that business was the most important thing. He also had a lot of power and was a very well-connected man, as he had some next-level access to places. And this is where they come across a dead Baron de Cobra. Turns out the daddy Destro had gone to Eton with his father. We also see a very young Baroness weeping about how her brother only wanted to help and was bringing in medical supplies. Destro then went on to examine the body of Eugene and noticed that he was wearing a bulletproof vest, which would have easily stopped the bullets from Snake Eye's pistol. Obviously, Destro knew a shit ton about guns and identified that it could have only been a high-velocity rifle bullet from an AK-47. So that means he was shot by the Vietnamese and not Snake Eyes. And when one of the officers dared question who he was, Destro showed his commanding presence. He was the 23rd Laird of Castle Destro, and showed the officer how two of the dead men had pretended to be from the South Vietnamese government to purchase a weapons consignment from him. But their actual intention was obviously to just kill him for the arms shipment. This entire flashback also shows us how the lineage actually works. The father-son relationship is actually more like a mentor-apprentice relationship. Like, that kid Destro was being trained by his father in the weapons business without really even knowing it. And you could tell from their interactions there wasn't a lot of, "I love you, son," going on. It was more of, "Don't fuck it up and embarrass your ancestors." But this whole thing is switched up heavily in the Action Force comics. Action Force number 45, Destro Down and Out, Part 2, has a pretty interesting premise. Destro doesn't remember anything at all, not even his own name or his father. But from the very beginning, despite his memory loss, we can still see his father's shadow looming over him. And it's only when he goes to sleep that we get to see his relationship with his father unfold in his dream. His father is clearly a harsh man who seems like he's, at the least, verbally abusive towards the young Destro. He calls him an impudent pup and chastises him for not caring enough about their family name. But it seems like Destro has finally had enough. He accuses his father of being old-fashioned and not adapting with the times, and the moment his father tries to put him down by commanding the power of the Silver Mask, Destro shoots him dead, claiming that he's no longer worthy of it. Yep, our Destro commits patricide. His father had grown soft and weak, and the organization needed someone powerful, a man of steel behind the Silver Mask. So he took off the mask from his father's face and placed it upon his own. These two took daddy issues to a whole new Shakespearean level, man. And even if you look at more peaceful versions of their relationship, like in Dreadnought's Declassified, it still feels pretty cold. The father bestows the mask upon the son, but not as a gift and more as a burden, a weight he has to carry now, all on his own. James McCullen, Destro the 24th. And now we finally come to the man, the myth, the legend himself, James McCullen, Destro the 24th. This is the guy we see all over, from the OG Marvel comics to the toy lines, the animated series, and the films. He's the one with his chest hair showing and ruby necklace flying around. He's a Scottish laird and the man running Mars Industry. And considering his ancestry, he has some next level knowledge about weapons and designs and manufactures them himself. Now, when I first read the comics, I remember his philosophy really stood out to me. Destro believes conflict is inevitable, and if weapons must exist, they should be controlled by someone with a sense of honor. And that idea pretty much drives his every action and decision. He has a very, very strict code of honor and always chooses sides accordingly. In fact, he has worked with Cobra, gone against them, and even helped the G.I. Joes when certain lines were crossed that he just couldn't accept. He appears in G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero number 11, and from the very beginning he's calculated as hell. He's out here playing chess while the rest just play checker. The entire time Cobra Commander had enlisted him, he was actually working to take over control of Cobra himself. Classic Destro, right? But he also saved Cobra's life when he was almost assassinated by his own son, because patricide is apparently a line he won't cross. In this continuity, at least. And I know what you're thinking. He sounds like a stand-up guy who's actually insanely smart and has had a shit ton of success throughout his arcs. But the real story behind all the jazz is that if you really look at his life across the Marvel and Devil's Due runs, his story is incredibly lonely. He's like a man of honor in a world full of cheats and liars. Plus, he's bound by a centuries-long tradition and code that has trapped him in this life forever. He's constantly being betrayed by people who are supposed to be his allies, and he's still just expected to keep going because the family name and family business matter more than him. And we really get to see this feeling of being trapped when he falls in love with the Baroness. All he wants is to have a life with her and lead Cobra with her next to him. But things go wrong. In one particular instance, when Cobra Commander sort of senses that Destro is about to betray him, he hires Major Blood to assassinate Destro. What a brutal lifestyle, man. Now, when Baroness finds out about this, she purposefully crashes their vehicle to stop Major Blood and ends up getting caught in the explosion herself. And this kind of broke Destro. Like, he almost unleashed some crazy violence on the world. Fortunately, she lived and recovered from her burns. But this story arc truly showed how much Destro wanted free from this life. He even tried to leave Cobra behind and start a new life in Castle Destro in Scotland with the love of his life. But nope. Once you're in the leagues with Cobra, you have no way out apparently. Then, the Rise of Cobra movie makes his entire story even more tragic. Here, he isn't carrying the silver mask as a symbol of his ancestry and their pride and honor. You see, in the film, he does a whole lot of research on nanotech and stuff, and wanted to find a way to destroy Paris to punish the French for what they had done to his ancestor. But he completely failed, and ended up getting badly burned. And this is when Cobra Commander uses Destro's own nanotech against him, and injects him with it. This transforms Destro's face into a living, breathing metal surface. It's horrific. And suddenly the silver mask is a sign of failure and humiliation and submission to the commander. He also has a pretty tragic arc in America's Elite, but we'll get to that in a minute as we move on to Alexander McCullen, the Lost Son. Now guys, if you think Destro's life is hard, wait until you hear about Alexander McCullen. His story is like a masterclass in messing up your kids, especially when you don't even know they exist. You see, in the Devil's Due storyline, it is revealed that when Destro, aka James McCullen, was younger, he had fallen in love with a Scottish woman named Sophie Smith. And though his family tried stopping him from seeing her, there ain't no one that could truly control this guy. So he did what he wanted to, and saw her whenever he wanted to. Well, I guess he did more than just see her, because soon she ended up pregnant when Destro wasn't in Scotland. She naturally went to Castle Destro for help and was instead paid to shut up and never show her face again. They threatened her and told her what would happen if she ever told anyone about this pregnancy and about the true father, including her own child. Now, if you ask this same backstory to Alexander, of course he'll tell you that Destro simply abandoned his mother for some rich, spoiled aristocrat's daughter. We all know who he's talking about. But his poor mother agreed to those conditions, and even when she spoke about his father, she only ever told Alexander his first name, James. Naturally, Alex grew up wanting to know his father and who he is. From a very young age, you could see that he was meant for more. He led the biggest local gangs and was a natural-born commander. So you can imagine his surprise and excitement when Mistress Armada tracked him down and informed him of his father being James McCullen Destro the 24th, a world-renowned arms dealer. Ever since then, all he wanted was his father's respect and approval. He desperately wanted a part in the family business, his piece of the pie. And he did manage to get it, but temporarily. Let me explain. So when Destro was confronted by Alexander, he was obviously reluctant to believe it. DNA tests were a no-brainer until he finally had to accept the reality of the situation. And he did embrace his son to a certain extent. He allowed him to command the Iron Grenadiers. But then Destro fell sick with some mysterious illness, and Alexander, being the power-hungry daddy's boy he is, took over the Destro legacy, the Silver Mask, even his father's voice and cadence, and declared himself the new Laird and leader of Mars. Bold move, I must say. His plan was simple: activate the Gaijin satellite to activate the nanomites across the nation and conquer America. And when the USA would be weakened, its enemies would get ready for war and buy the arms from none other than Mars and Destro. They'll literally have a monopoly over weapons, as well as the nanites. Here we get to see a sick Destro lying in his bed. Alexander promises his father that their family business will go on and Destro's legacy will prevail. He also shows him a picture of a young Destro with his then lover, Alexander's mother. But Destro only points to the image of the Baroness, which enrages Alexander. You can see here how much rage and anger he has bottled up because of his childhood, because of Destro leaving, and him growing up in a broken home. However, unfortunately, Alexander had ambition and desperation, but not as much in terms of education or intelligence. I guess he was a bastard in more ways than one, and his desire to prove himself often got in the way of him truly carrying the Destro legacy. That's exactly what happens here too. Alexander's plan is foiled by the Joes and a now free Cobra commander, and just as he is about to lose, our OG Destro finally wakes up. He's still weak, but at least he can move. Alex and Lillian are rescued by the Baroness and then imprisoned. I guess they gotta answer to the real Destro, huh? The storyline of Alexander and Destro continues in America's Elite, and this is where it becomes truly tragic. It is here that Destro, for the very first time, officially acknowledges Alexander as his heir and bestows upon him the honor of the Silver Mask. And that's like a huge frigging deal, guys, because this kind of power gets to people's heads. We know Alexander, he definitely wasn't ready for it, and we were right. He was impulsive and hungry to prove himself as the true Laird, and even chastise his own father. But at the end of the day, he was nothing more than a bargaining chip. You see, Cobra Commander had managed to trap Destro in a very, very sticky situation, and the only way for Destro to get out of it was to give up his entire Mars Industries empire, as well as his son Alexander, over to the Commander. The Commander used this poor boy who just wanted to prove to his father that he was worthy. And this also shows you how tragic the life of Destro became, but it gets even worse. Eventually, as we come close to the final battles to incite the Third World War, Destro tries to stop Alexander and his Iron Grenadiers. Seeing his father and his disapproval, Alex takes off that mask that had symbolically trapped him for so many years and walks off. But Armada, thinking that Destro wants him dead, fatally shoots Alexander. Destro had to carry the lifeless body of his own son off the battlefield. Now, if that isn't tragic, I don't know what is. Baroness, lover. Now, I think we've all heard a lot about the Baroness, Anastasia de Cobra, already because, duh, they did pretty much everything together. So I'll quickly take you guys through the most important bit. Let's start with their meet-cute. In the original Marvel Comics run, Destro and Baroness had met when they were practically kids, attending a training academy in Edinburgh. They were both really good fencers and often sparred together, and I guess all that sparring created one hell of a bond, because Destro couldn't get her out of his mind from that moment onwards. He literally joined Cobra because he would bring him closer to, and he always just had one more objective: take over Cobra and rule with Baroness by his side. Pretty romantic, not gonna lie. You could tell he genuinely loved her. I mean, remember when she almost died trying to save him? Imagine 80% of her body was burnt and she was in an actual coma. His love was clearly not unrequited because this girl would give her life for him. Their relationship changes depending on the continuity, but the important part is this. Whether she's framed as his lover, partner, or wife, Baroness is the closest thing Destro ever had to a true equal. But hey, labels are overrated, right? It is really sad, though, that they never truly get their happily ever after. They're just constantly pulled in different, often opposite directions because of their loyalties. And for what? The entire reason she had joined Cobra and become a terrorist was because of what happened to her brother. Because she thought that he had been killed by Snake Eyes. To then find out that it was all a lie and was staged. To find out that your brother died for nothing and you joined Cobra for nothing. Just imagine that. All the time she stayed loyal to Cobra and set aside her relationship with Destro. Obviously, they should have just run off into the sunset or a private island since they're both like filthy rich. Then in the America's Elite series, once again we see a tragic ending for both her and Destro and their family. See here, firstly her and Destro go through a lot, with her initially sort of betraying Destro and then rescuing him and even taking over Cobra with him, before ultimately becoming imprisoned by the Joes. But even more importantly, their relationship becomes complex as they have a child together. She even names the child after her brother, Eugene. With that, let's get straight into the story because up next we have Eugene. Eugene was born in the America's Elite run and was revealed to us in issue number 24 in Sins of the Mother arc. He is the son of Destro and the Baroness and is named after her late brother. Now, naturally, from the moment he was born, Eugene was a target. I mean, come on, his father was like the world's biggest arms dealer, and his mother was a dangerous as hell terrorist leader. You can't possibly expect him to have a normal childhood, can you? And he clearly did not. Remember we told you that the Baroness had been captured and imprisoned by the Joes? Well, she manages to break free when Cobra cut the power to their headquarters, and thus began her path of gruesome revenge. But guys, guess what? She had actually given birth to Eugene in captivity itself, and as it turns out, Cobra Commander had kidnapped their infant child. So even though when Baroness faced off with Cobra Commander and wanted nothing more than to hurt him and kill him, Destro could not let her. After all, he held the upper hand. With no other choice left and desperation creeping in, Destro had one last card up his sleeve, to give up everything. Destro offered the commander his entire empire, from his companies to his troops, and even all his tech. And all he wanted in return was to leave with the Baroness and their son. You guys already know what happens next, as Cobra Commander agrees, but with one added condition. Alexander Destro would also belong to him. And Destro was like, yeah, fuck it, sure. I mean, what choice did he have, guys? So he unmasked himself, took his son, whose name was finally revealed to be Eugene, and left with the Baroness. Now, here's the most tragic bit of it all that finally ties the story of Alexander, Destro, Baroness, and Eugene all together. You see, Alexander's death in this arc wasn't exactly the end. Once Alexander died, Destro turned himself in to the authorities, and the series ended with Baroness and her son Eugene watching his father, Destro's trial on TV. Now that's just a sad ending for this family. One dead, one in prison, and the final two left alone to fend for themselves. But I guess that's the price you pay. Legacy of Clan Destro in the movie. Now, we have already covered the early ancestor of Destro in the G.I. Joe film, but there's one particular comic issue that gives us yet another gruesome and bloody legacy of the G.I. Joe clan, and this is the official prequel to G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. We see a young little child, Destro, being taught about his clan's history and legacy by his father. The flashback takes us all the way back to 1867, where one of their earliest clan members was selling weapons in the United States. You see, the former Confederate soldiers and expatriate Irish were planning an invasion of Canada. But who was Destro to judge? He was just there to sell some weapons, and he showed them his insanely impressive weapons collection, both in terms of quality and quantity. But when he was being paid, there was a misunderstanding. He was given Dixie bills, which were basically worthless, and it turns out they had no plan of paying him at all, as they pulled out a gun ready to shoot him. Now, if you've learned anything about this clan today, it's that they do not take betrayal well, and they're actually really good at combat. So not only did he punch the lights out of that guy, he also unleashed the entire might of his weapon on every single man present there. And this ancestor was named Angus Lee McCullen, the 20th Laird of Destro Castle, the current Destro's great-great-grandfather. Apparently, he also sold to both sides of the Mexican uprising and also in the Franco-Prussian War. Hell, even Bismarck himself called him the rarest of creatures, a scoundrel with the honor of a saint. You see how these descriptions lay down what's expected of Destro? What has forever been the tradition and legacy of their clan. This is how it was all passed down. Darklon. Finally, last but not least, we come to the weird cousin of the family. If you haven't heard of Darklon, he's basically the black sheep of the McCullen clan. He's a distant cousin of Destro and the ruler of a tiny war-torn country called Darklonia, which is constantly having civil wars and whatnot. In the original continuity, he too wears a silver mask just like the Destro, but like I said, they weren't the same. Darklons worked in the business of mercenaries, privateering, and investment banking. While they were similar to the Destro clan in the sense that they didn't really choose sides, they were also dissimilar because the Darklons actually had no code of honor whatsoever. They just did what they wanted for money, greed, and often survival. In the real American hero continuity, we see Darklon appear with the Iron Grenadiers, working under his bigger, badder cousin. There's even a moment where he's seemingly killed when Destro launches a missile at Darklon's castle. But luckily, he was hiding in the bunker and survived the whole ordeal. If you ask me what's tragic about him here, I honestly have nothing. And that's the real tragedy. He was just a side character in a world where his entire family had main character energy. Like, my guy just could not escape the shadows or even fill the shoes of the Destro. But the real tragedy strikes Artyom Darklon in the recently released Energon comics. So this comic run is obviously all about Destro, but at the very beginning of this series, we're in Darklonia, which is embroiled in a civil war. Destro, of course, overthrows the current government, if you can even call him that, with his battle android troopers. You must be wondering why the hell Destro is involved in a civil war where he has no profit or gain. Just to save innocent people? Nah, not even Destro is that generous. Well, he actually did all of that to reinstate his cousin Artyom Darklon. But eventually Destro got wrapped up in a whole lot of shit and had to go MIA. This meant that his cousin Darklon became acting chairperson and CEO of Mars Industry. And guess what he did? The first chance he got, he signed over Mars to the Crimson Twins, Tomax and Xamot, who were literally Destro's biggest rivals. So when Destro finally returned, you can imagine his surprise. Once he took over what was rightfully his, he finally went back to Darklonia to dish out some well-deserved consequences. As a punishment for his betrayal, he branded Darklon with that same hot, molten silver mask as he screamed out in pain. Jeez, when will this cycle stop, man? Why Destro's lineage matters more than Cobra Commander's. Yeah, we know that Cobra Commander is the guy running the show and he's the real deal. So why the hell should we care about Destro, right? Well, no, wrong. Cobra Commander is just one man, usually just a sad car salesman. Destro, on the other hand, is a whole dynasty. Even the name doesn't belong to any one person. It's a symbol, a legacy, and if you really think about it, Cobra Commander wouldn't even come close to winning if it wasn't for Destro and Mars technology. Cobra Commander can be replaced. He even was replaced in the Sunbow animated series. After all, he's just a leader. They come and they go. But Destro? That's an entire ancestry. They literally have a huge-ass family castle in Scotland. If Destro were ever to fall, that shit would reverberate across the world and across history. The Destro clan has been the face of war for centuries and centuries, long before Cobra Commander ever existed. They single-handedly hold the key to winning, except usually in a war neither side wins, and it's just the Destro clan coming out on top. And that's exactly why Destro's lineage matters more and makes him so much scarier and central to the G.I. Joe universe. And there you have it, the impressive but oh so tragic lineage of Destro. This clan has survived everything, including being branded by a steel mask, but the one thing they haven't survived is their own legacy. That has ultimately been both the success and downfall of them all. And I'm sure this isn't the last we've seen of them, but hopefully Eugene will be the one who finally breaks that cycle and puts an end to all this intergenerational trauma. Unlikely, but hey, we can hope. With that, we've come to the end of the video, and as usual, don't forget to smash the like button if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more such G.I. Joe content. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye!